now we're ready to go.
Okay. Hello and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Wonky Weekly.
I'm Rashaan James II.
And I'm Sid Solomon. It's gonna be a wonk fest.
Sure.
The tolerance that you show me on a week-to-week basis it warms my cold little heart. It's lovely. Hi, Rashaan. How are you?
I said, I'm good. I'm good. It's morning, and I'm feeling springy, even though it's cold outside here in New York. It's not warm, but I wore a shirt that's gonna make me feel like it's spring.
Yeah, we were just noticing before we started. You are pastel-y and spring-like, and I am in my darkness, I don't know. I'm also wearing pajama pants for the first time as we do one of these. It occurred to me for the very first time, I don't need to wear real pants. Why would I?
I'm not wearing pants. I'm wearing
anyway. So, Rashaan, on this early, cold but spring-like morning here in New York, we are going to be talking about a fabulous topic, I think, and with a fun guest for today. So, first of all, what are we talking about today?
Liaison areas.
Liaison areas, places not in our office cities, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And as I mentioned, we have a very exciting guest today. Rashaan, who is our special guest?
Elizabeth Yvette Ramirez.
Elizabeth Yvette Ramirez, turn on that camera.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. Look at your mic. It looks expensive.
It was from a friend because I don't have money.
Elizabeth Yvette Ramirez, welcome to Wonky Weekly. How are you this morning?
Doing well. It's feeling a little springish in Boston. It's still a bit cold, but we're moving in the right direction.
That's always good to hear. So you are joining us from, are you in Boston? Are you around Boston? Are you near Boston? Where exactly are you?
I am in Boston. I live about 10 minutes from the airport. So if you hear a plane go overhead, it's my fault.
So Elizabeth, it is fabulous to have you here. And today, as Rashaan said, we are going to be talking about liaison areas. You obviously, you live in Boston. You live and you work there. That's where you make your living. So to begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself personally. Who are you? How did you get to where you are, both literally in the Boston area and in terms of your professional life and what you do?
Sure. I moved around a bunch, spent time in California, Arizona as a kid, and came out to Boston to go to college. And like many a Boston theater human, stuck around because it's a great community out here. I spent a lot of time in sort of fringe and community theaters, was lucky enough to get pulled into Equity Theater about 2016. And there was a renegotiation happening for the local contract, which is neat. And Stephanie Frey and Leslie Sears and a bunch of other really fantastic humans just continued to bother me about joining in negotiations and observing and doing all of the things until I gave in, and here I am forever. I'm a stage manager about town, working at anywhere that will have me, really.
And how did stage management become a thing that you were interested in pursuing professionally? How did Rashaan and I aren't stage managers, so it never would have occurred to me to become one. So how did that become something that became your livelihood?
Sure. It is a bit of a weird track. I don't think a lot of people dream of oh, I just want to sit in the dark with a headset on. It's my whole life dream. But I loved working in theater. I enjoyed acting, but it wasn't oh, this is the thing I want to do forever. Directing is very fun, and I do that in town on occasion. But I really enjoy sort of the logistics and getting into the nitty gritty of making a thing happen. As far as, if I had to pick a 9-to-5 job, working really dumb hours at night and getting to make a lot of spreadsheets and being around a whole bunch of people that I really love is kind of the best of all possible scenarios.
I love Rashaan, no. Never.
It's like a nightmare. Absolute nightmare. Spreadsheets are like my worst nightmare.
Bleeding feet you're fine with, but spreadsheets are.
Exactly. That's how you know I'm a dancer at art.
But you have all these problems, but then you can just organize them into a spreadsheet and life is okay.
No, I thank God for stage managers for that because I don't have that brain. So Elizabeth, you kind of embody a lot of like governance positions all at once right now. So you were the liaison chair, you are the acting liaison delegate for the Boston area. You are the at-large counselor elect for with the Boston area also, yes?
Yes.
Yes. And wait, did I miss any? Are you anything else?
Are you anything else, Elizabeth?
I think that's it as far as the Boston area goes. In theory, I will not be holding all of those things at once because that would be a bit too much. With the restructuring of communities, a lot of the liaison chairs got together with, folks from generally around the regions, a fantastic working group, and decided that communities was actually going to be a better fit for the liaison system than a straight up committee with a chair.
So let's pause right there and unpack that wonkiness because there's a lot going on right there. So, Elizabeth, can you define for us what is a liaison area?
Yes. All right. A liaison area is any city that has more than 100 equity members living in it and working in it, and the 50 miles surrounding that city. So you can get, Boston goes all the way up to like Ogunquit and Maine. We go down to Providence. We go out to Worcester, about halfway across the state. We do not make it all the way to the Berkshires. That is a different liaison area.
Pop quiz, Rashaan, do you know off the top of your head how many liaison areas we have at Equity?
28 or 29.
It's 28. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Rashaan, as a counselor from the Eastern region, do you happen to know off the top of your head how many liaison areas we have in the Eastern region?
Oh, no, but I might be able to name them all if I go through them.
Elizabeth, off the top of your head, do you know how many we have in the Eastern region? All right, then let's do this. The three of us, we're going to go one at a time. Let's see if we can name all of the Eastern liaison areas. Rashaan, you go first.
Buffalo, Rochester, of course.
Great. Elizabeth.
Well, my hometown, Boston.
Boston. I'm going to go difficult. Nashville in the Eastern region and a liaison area. Rashaan.
Albany.
Albany, capital area. Yes. Elizabeth.
Central Florida.
Central Florida. I'm going to take that cue and say South Florida. Rashaan.
DC.
DC and
Baltimore. DC
and Baltimore are one liaison area. Elizabeth, there's two left. No, there's
Philadelphia.
Three left. Philadelphia. I'm going to stay in the same state and say Pittsburgh. And so there's one more, Rashaan.
Oh, God. What state is it in?
Elizabeth, do you know? Can you figure it out? Think below the Mason-Dixon line.
Atlanta.
That was one of the very first things I did when I became Eastern Regional Vice President. I made sure I had all 10 of our liaison areas memorized. An important thing to do. So, Elizabeth, so Boston is one of Equity's liaison areas. I believe it's one of Equity's largest liaison areas. Tell us, as a worker, beyond just being in governance, tell us something that you think that most Equity members don't know about living and working in Boston as an Equity stage manager or actor.
Sure. I will go for this, that there is a huge difference, like almost a divide that none shall cross between our local productions, which feature mostly local actors, and the touring productions that come in and are zero local actors. Maybe they'll have some overhire. And never the twain shall meet. The houses are not the same. The staff aren't the same. The companies don't talk to each other. It's actually sort of sad. I wish that touring companies that were like here for a couple of weeks would like hang out with the Boston actors, but it really doesn't happen. And it's so sad.
Huh. And I know, Elizabeth, something that I hear all the time from our members living in liaison areas is that it's very common, especially among the largest flagship theaters in their area, that they will do much of their hiring, both of actors and of stage managers, from out of town. What is that like in Boston? Is that true? I mean, in Boston, in the Boston area, there's the Huntington, there's American Repertory Theater, which tend to sort of, I think, like dominate the landscape. What people outside of Boston think about as the big Boston theaters. Can you talk about the mix of local versus New York or out of town hiring there?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, every liaison area is going to have a completely different market depending on what theaters are there and what their general population is like. Boston has a unique position of having a ton of schools. There are so many college students in Boston that are there to study musical theater or regular theater, that there is a very noticeable pipeline of people staying for a couple years, being, either interns, assistant level staff, or ensemble actors, getting a few credits and moving to New York. That is their goal. That's what they want to do. It is a noticeable trend that you will get people who fulfill that dream, which is like super great for them. They've gotten their credits, they move to New York, and then get hired back to Boston after they've moved to New York. It's almost become a truism that if you want to get hired at neat theaters, the best way is to pretend to move to New York so you have a New York address, but then tell them that you have local housing.
Ooh.
And by the way, NEAT is one of those contracts we talked about before. It's the New England Area Theaters, which it's a brand new committee, yes?
Yes, NEAT is a brand new committee we're actually really excited about, because unlike a lot of the contracts in Boston, guest artist, special appearance, or even small professional theaters, NEAT actually has a group of employers that we bargain with collectively. And so it's really helpful that we now have our own committee to actually get that work done, and people who know those employers and can bargain with them effectively.
Awesome. I cut you off. So you can go back to the land of where we were before.
It is, I have to say, in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, right before the pandemic and since, it has gotten a little bit better. A lot of the larger theaters, the Huntington specifically, I tend to be very critical of the theaters, and so I have to say good things when they actually do good things. Has gone out of its way to do a local hiring push. A lot of our local actors have been getting more stage time at American Repertory Theater, at Merrimack Repertory Theater, at the Huntington, just really, really exciting and really satisfying. So I hope that it continues, but we definitely do still see a push of when the really exciting shows happen, it's all New York actors.
So Rashaan and Elizabeth, this is going to be an episode where I learn a lot, because there have been, as you both alluded to before, changes of brewing in the way that our liaison areas are governed isn't the right word, but the ways in which members living in our 28 liaison areas have their voices heard. So we have historically had a liaison area committee system, and each liaison area has a chair, which again, Elizabeth, you have held that position in Boston. You have been the Boston area liaison chair. But now, and this goes all the way back to episode number 1, Rashaan, of Wonky Weekly, all those many weeks ago, where we talked about how equity was forming these communities. And so this is the first time I'm actually learning this. I think you both alluded to the fact that we are going to be turning essentially the liaison committee system into more of a community system. So can you both sort of walk me through talk about how the liaison committees have functioned in the past and what the changes are going to mean practically for how members in the liaison areas interface with governance through that community structure? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I can start and I'll let Elizabeth clean up my mess. She's actually really good at that. So in the past, the liaison committees acted more like governance committees, but not. So they were in this ambiguous land of, are you governance or are you not? And so that ambiguity caused a little bit of an issue. There was a limit on how many people could participate. The liaison groups could only have a certain amount of people, which excluded groups of people. That, and then also that meant that those people were like the pipeline of thought from that liaison, without the general body of the people who lived in that area also being a part of the information that was flowing through. So the thought was, how do we expand that in the exact same way that we said, well, how do we expand getting members to participate in a way that doesn't feel cumbersome or onerous, but also allows their voices in the room? We said, well, the liaison groups look a little more like the communities than they do like committees. So if we change it into something that participation isn't onerous, we might be able to get voices and more participation. So what we did is we took the 28 liaison groups and we made them into liaison communities where people can just voice who they are and what they are particular to their liaison area, rather than having this small governance but not governance thing. You have a lot to clean up. Good luck, Elizabeth.
I was going to say, clean up that mess. No, that made a lot of sense to me. But
Yeah, no, you did a great job. You covered a lot of good stuff.
Clean that up, though. Clean it up.
No, Rashaan's super right. The previous system was confusing for a lot of people, because when you have a name like committee and chair and official structure, it feels like, oh, well, you're doing very official things. People would think that the liaison committees had the ability to self-govern the liaison areas, which they did not, because we are a national union and things like flow downward. And so it left a lot of people feeling frustrated, because they would come in and say, oh, well, what can I do on this committee? And the answer was, who knows? And so this change to community groups gives us a lot more freedom to do whatever that community needs. Because, as I said earlier, the liaison areas are not one size fits all. Every market, depending on like where you are, how close to other big cities you are, how big your market is, what theaters are there, are going to have super different needs. And so a community group with a leader that can say, oh, we're going to focus on these type of events, we're going to focus on this type of outreach or education, has much more ability to actually reach members in a way that is good for that liaison area. And so I'm super excited about this. And the part that I really love is, not only do we have a chair or a community leader now that has to not be a counselor, which is why I will soon be taking off that hat. They also get a counselor that is advising them. So it's like a two-person head of this group. But that means that we're not losing any connection to governance, because we still have somebody who's going to be actively involved in governance, who can say, oh, well, here's what, this committee is working on. Here's what this regional board was just talking about, your liaison area in that way. We have that ability to both get information up to governance and get information back down from governance to the people in the area. So I'm very excited about that.
Real quick, whose Slack is slacking? I'm hearing a Slack. Who's doing it?
It wasn't mine. For once, it wasn't one of my 17 Slacks.
Rookie mistake, not turning your Slack off before you come on Wonky Weekly. Elizabeth, before we move on from liaison area committees, now communities, onto the convention, can you talk a little bit about your pathway to becoming the chair of the Boston Liaison Committee? Because for a long time, it was Michael Del Orto. So can you just talk about real quick how you came to become the liaison chair in Boston?
Sure. I actually love talking about this. So technically, by the book, the liaison chair is selected by the committee every year. The liaison areas often have a lot of difficulty filling a committee in the first place. You'll have ones that don't have all 15 seats filled. You'll have others where people are like vying for entry. And so sometimes finding someone who actually wants to dedicate the, as we all are, unpaid time to being chair, sometimes it's actually difficult. And so one person might stay in that position for a long time. Now, of course, there are other worlds in which people are vying for the position, but it feels, rude or ungrateful, or like it's not your time yet. So you don't want to necessarily challenge someone who has been in a seat for, 10 years. And so it becomes a little bit of a social faux pas to try and seize power. It feels like you're trying to pull a coup or something. But in theory, they're elected every year. Selected. I keep saying elected. And so Michael, who I love and adore and has some of the best apple butter that I have ever eaten. If you haven't, you're really missing out, Sid.
Oh, I have.
But Michael had served for a long time and actually wanted to find new people. There was a huge influx of sort of younger voices on the committee around the time that I came in, which was really exciting. And Michael wanted to be able to say, I don't live and work in the city of Boston as much anymore. Somebody who should take this seat instead. And so that was really lovely. And I think we've made a lot of strides since then. I keep saying when I joined the committee, it was an all-white body. And we've made a lot of changes since then.
Rashaan, can you take us down the road to convention? Because we've talked about Elizabeth's function as a liaison chair, and now the liaison committees transforming into communities, which sounds very exciting to me. Let's talk about convention and liaison area delegates.
Awesome. So I mentioned at the top that Elizabeth wears lots of hats, and one of those hats is a delegate to the national convention.
Yes, a liaison area delegate, which is different than all the other delegates.
Tell us why.
Most of the delegates are serving their entire region and are elected by their entire region. As a Boston delegate, all of the signatures that I had to, get on the ballot had to be from local Boston humans, which was super exciting because it means you have to actually go talk to people and see what they want.
So yeah, what I'm loving about the three of us is that we are all currently delegates to the national convention. And right now we're all different kinds of delegates. Rashaan is a delegate by virtue of the fact that he's a member of the National Council. He was elected by the entire membership to be a counselor. And because he's a counselor, one of his functions is being a delegate. I am an Eastern Principal delegate to the convention. I ran specifically to be a delegate. So I was elected by only the members in the Eastern region. Only they got to vote for whether or not I would be a delegate. And to a certain extent, I represent members from the Eastern region in its entirety when I'm at the convention. And Elizabeth is the liaison delegate from Boston. She was nominated by Anne. Were you opposed in that election? I don't think you were.
I was not opposed.
You weren't. So not that there'd be anything wrong with being opposed, but you got onto the ballot by securing signatures from Boston area members. And then if there had been a contested election, it would have been up entirely to the members living in the Boston area. Only they got to vote. So this brings up an interesting question for me, Elizabeth, because you concurrently served as the chair of the Boston Liaison Committee when it still existed in that form, and also as liaison area delegate to the convention. How were those two things different, and how were you able to use either or both to advance the needs of members living in your liaison area?
Oh, what a great question. So the liaison chair is really a lifeline to the community itself, versus the delegate is somebody who's going to take the wants and needs of that community and move it up the chain into governance. Because the liaison chair, you don't really have or you didn't in its previous form, really have a strong weigh in to sort of making policy change. And so this is actually one of the things about convention that is most exciting, is that, as Rashaan mentioned, you get one meeting a year where staff comes to Boston and has a membership meeting. But unlike the membership meeting in New York, Boston members were not able to say, here's a thing that we really need, and make a resolution and then vote and then send it to council. The meetings that we had in Boston were more informational. And so there was no way for Boston members, unless they were going to like get on the train and go to New York for a membership meeting, to say, here is an issue that I want to raise to governance. So the convention gives the ability for the community to vote for a representative, in this case, me, to take those things that need changing and go put it into the governance world. In a way that otherwise, you have a whole bunch of members that are, I'm not going to say completely disenfranchised, but underrepresented.
I have a question for both of you. So we're in the land of convention right now. We're talking about the convention, and we have all served at one equity convention because there's only been the one. Rashaan, at the convention last year, since you are a convention delegate because you're a counselor and elected by the entire membership, were you conscious of the fact at the convention that you were there to represent the entire membership, and voting in the interests of the entire membership, as opposed to the members where you live or the members doing the kind of work that you do? How did you think about that at the convention?
I think I do it the same way, or I did it the same way as I do it in council. So as a counselor, I say to myself, I represent all 52,000, period. But what is intrinsic to me are the ideas of an Eastern Chorus person, because those are the things that I understand the best. So when there are deficiencies in that, I'm able to fill in those gaps much better than if there's a stage manager issue. But I represent Western stage managers as much as I represent Eastern Chorus members. So no matter if it's council or the convention, I'm always aware that one to one, it's all equal in my book. What differentiates me, and the reason why my title is the way that it is because those are the things that I would consider myself an expert on. I am an expert at being an Eastern Chorus person. Therefore, I am able to give more in those ways. I mean, if anything, it would be like the Black gay Eastern Chorus, like it falls into all the things that make me me. But those things, just because I am those things, I can also represent the other people and understand and listen. I mean, that's why it makes sense to have a bunch of us in a room, because when I hear something, I go, oh, okay, that's what they need. Now, how does that fit into the bigger picture of all 52,000? Or I say, this is what I need. And so how does this fit into the bigger picture of the 52,000? So yeah, I try, and I can't claim to be perfect, but my goal is to always represent the entire membership and what is good for us institutionally as 52,000, not just Eastern Chorus performers.
And Elizabeth, essentially same question to you. At the last convention, how much did your function as the representative for members in the Boston area affect the way that you thought about the decisions you were helping to make and the votes that you were taking?
It's a really interesting question. I'm going to make up a number here and say 80% of the votes that I was taking, what benefits all of the members, also benefit the members in Boston. So there is most of the time when the best interest of people is simply the best interest of people. But I would definitely be aware of, if I'm a counselor, say a New York principal counselor, I know that if in a moment I am not advocating for New York principal actors, there are plenty of other voices in the room who are thinking that way and can do that. If I am, if I'm representing Boston, or if I'm representing, Nashville, because I was actually lucky enough that there were other people from like the greater Boston area in the room. Tavon Gamble, who is amazing. But for many of the liaison delegates, they were the only person from that area in the room. And so you do have a little bit of that responsibility to say, if I don't speak up for the people here, there is actually no one else who is necessarily going to do that. And so it becomes a little bit of that. You have the, I guess, responsibility to represent people who otherwise will not have their voice in the room as much as you are representing the best interests of everybody in totality.
I find it so fascinating because in a union where we're a nationally governed union and where we have typically only ever had the National Council as a sort of representative body in which everybody is tasked with representing everybody all at the same time. The convention was really our very first sort of attempt at a real elected body where people were representing different constituency groups specifically. And so I will continue to sort of be fascinated as we move forward in how those representative models differ from each other, which I think is a helpful segue into your soon-to-be new position, Elizabeth. And for anybody who's not paying attention, Elizabeth has been nominated to be an Eastern at-large counselor. There were 3 open positions and 3 people were nominated. And so as the union's processes go, when the election ends on May 25th, Elizabeth will be deemed elected. So as of May 25th, Elizabeth will be a counselor of Actors Equity Association, an Eastern at-large counselor. So we are in this interesting sort of in-between position where you are essentially a counselor-elect. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you. I'm
very exciting. How do you feel? Do you feel different? Are you glowing?
I am, okay. The most exciting part, because I am a huge nerd, which is why I feel very at home on this show. I have been observing council for pretty much the past 2 years. So it's really exciting that I'll finally be able to like get on the list and say things.
So when I was elected to council for the first time in 2015, and when Rashaan was elected to the council for the first time in 2016, the position of at-large counselor did not exist. So Elizabeth, what is an at-large counselor?
An at-large counselor is a counselor who does not live in an office city. So you're an Eastern at-large counselor, you cannot be living and working in New York. So it saves a seat for people who are out in the regions to make sure that we have a voice in the room.
Rashaan, you were around, I was around too, but you were around when the at-large seats were being created. And this was part of a constitutional change. We had to change the Constitution in order to change the makeup of the council. So first of all, at-large seats, thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you think?
Oh, definitely thumbs up. So
super awkward if you said thumbs down as Elizabeth.
I'm like, well, I guess I'll just go.
So why are they a thing and why are they important?
But this conversation is one that's very, very vivid. And I won't say names of who said what, but I remember a counselor saying, you know, we only have representation from the regions when we get lucky. And that was so true. In 2016, when I was first elected, if I were to look around the room, the people in the room were almost all from office cities, almost every single person in the room. And we got lucky that we had a couple who sat in one of those 3 positions of Eastern, Western, or Central, but also the job categories of the 3, but were not in office city. We literally just got lucky. So the conversation immediately turned to, instead of, which was really great, instead of do we need this, it turned into how do we do this? And what we did is we made a carve out. We made a carve out of the 75 seats that are not the officer seats. We said we need to dedicate actual seats to these people so that we can elect them and have the representation. Another reason why the representation wasn't happening is because the way that our union functions when it comes to elections. A lot of the time, if you don't live in an office city and you work, say, most of your, let's use Elizabeth, you live in Boston, your connection to the equity membership might be a lot smaller than Rashaan, who lives in New York City, where there's a much larger mass of members for me to connect with. So it made it harder for people in the regions to be representatives because people wouldn't necessarily know them or be able to vote for them. So by carving them out, we're dedicating that knowledge, that institutional thinking of particular areas and we're putting it in the room on purpose instead of being lucky.
Just to further illustrate Rashaan's point, when I was elected Eastern Regional Vice President in 2018, I became the chair of the Eastern Regional Board, which is the essentially the committee that is made up exclusively of the counselors from the Eastern region. Immediately following that election, every member of the Eastern Regional Board was from New York City. Every single one. We did not have a single person on the council from the Eastern region who did not live in New York City. So Elizabeth, you're not quite a counselor yet. You're a counselor-elect. So I can't ask you about your experience as a counselor, the way in which you take votes yet. But here's an interesting question. Having been a liaison chair who is selected, not elected, and doesn't necessarily have specific entree into the governance process, having been a liaison area delegate who's elected exclusively by the members in the Boston area and sent to convention to act specifically on their behalf. And now as you head into becoming an at-large counselor who is a person from Boston, but is elected, essentially deemed elected by the entire membership and has a legal responsibility to represent the entire membership, not just the members in Boston. How are you thinking about your representative role differently as you prepare to step into this new position?
Sure. That's a really deep question. So there are a number of ways in which sometimes as a liaison chair or now as a liaison community leader, it feels a little bit like standing outside the castle shouting, where you are saying, these are the things that I need. These are the things that I, want to be a successful, Boston theater person. But the actual implementation of those things, you are almost always handing off to somebody else. You can suggest, I think it would be great if it worked this way, but with no ability to say, oh, well, we tried that in this other liaison area, and oh, well, actually the NLRB will totally ruin us if we try to do that, or, any other practical, legal, financial, any consideration of how do changes that we need get implemented. You're in a little bit of an easier position when you can just say, this is what I want, I need somebody to help me. It is now my job to actually work on the implementation of those things, to say, this is what the membership wants. How can we best actually achieve this? And so there are a lot of different considerations. I have a lot of learning to do and catch up because there are, policies that have been tried and failed, or policies that have tried and sort of fizzled out for no reason. Learning what we actually can do, what is way too difficult to achieve, and we maybe need to come at it from a different direction. Because I don't want to be somebody who just rails in the council room but then doesn't actually solve any of the problems. I want to be somebody that, actually gets behind initiatives and moves the needle forward for members. And so a lot of it is learning, and a lot of it is figuring out who to talk to when, and a lot of it is just the wonky policy stuff to say, okay, we actually have to write something that can affect people. Let's do the work.
Is there anything that you think we need to touch on, Elizabeth?
Let me see. Ooh, I can talk about this because this is fun. As soon as I officially become a counselor, I am no longer eligible to be the community leader for Boston. And so we will have to find another person, and there are so many fantastic people in Boston. This is going to be like a wealth of choices to lead the community. But I still have the ability to be involved by being the counselor person who advises. The thing I'm super excited about is that the counselor advisors to the new liaison communities, to get all the words in the right space, is not beholden to only being involved in that one liaison area. You can advise for multiple, which I think will be really, really exciting because, as I've said a couple times today, all of the liaison areas are super different. Their markets are different. The people there are going to need different things. And so the ability to actually get involved in multiple liaison areas is going to be such a boon for being an at-large counselor, where I'm not just thinking about the people in Boston, I'm thinking about the people in all of the regions, and also, of course, in New York as well. I'm representing everybody. But the ability to actually meet members that I otherwise would not be able to, because I don't drive to Nashville very often, will be really exciting to actually get to learn other liaison areas, how they work, and what they need as well.
I made it a priority, and I think Sid also, while he was on tour, to connect with members in liaison areas while we were touring. And I got lucky because I got to go to the Albany membership meeting, the Denver membership meeting, the Dallas membership meeting, the Nashville membership meeting, and one other. So I got to experience a bunch of the liaison markets. And what I found is, we group these liaison markets by area, right, in the region in which they are. And actually, what I found is that it's the market size that makes them kind of more like each other rather than what coast they sit on. To me, San Francisco looks a little more like Dallas than Dallas does to Fort Worth, even though Fort Worth and Dallas are the same liaison area. So like it's really interesting to hear you say that like you'll be able to have like direct comparisons by being able to be active inside of these liaison communities and see what is actually happening and be able to compare and contrast what is going on in these different areas. That's really cool.
Can I make a confession, and you all tell me if I'm a jerk for saying this? I hate the term the regions in the same way that I hate the term regional theater. And I say this as a New Yorker because in our industry, regional theater means theater outside of New York City, as if there is this binary between there is New York theater or real theater or whatever we want to call that, and then other theater, which, I mean, I'll tell you honestly, when I grew up, I did not know, growing up here in New York City, I didn't know about theater outside New York. It didn't even occur to me. I mean, I come from a very supportive artistic family. Like, I went to Broadway shows growing up. Like, it'd be a special occasion. We get to go once or twice a year to a Broadway show, but almost always a Broadway show. And then when I started studying acting seriously at LaGuardia Arts High School, both of my parents very supportively went and got subscriptions to nonprofit theaters here in New York. And that was the first time I'd ever understood the concept of a resident theater. Like, you go back to the same building a bunch of times per year and see them put on a season of plays. I didn't even know that existed, really. Hadn't even occurred to me. So like, I started going to Second Stage, I started going to Manhattan Theater Club, and I got that sense. And it wasn't until I started looking at colleges and I got invited to go out to Minneapolis to go audition for the Guthrie BFA program, where I eventually went, where they were like, and this is what regional theater is. It's like, oh. So in the industry, this separation of New York theater versus regional theater, and the fact that when we put our resumes together, you are expected to put every little rinky-dink thing you've ever done on the island of Manhattan at the top of your resume, and really extraordinary, artistically valuable, high-paying stuff done anywhere outside of New York City below it, is so bizarre. I heard a lot when I was a counselor, and Rashaan, I imagine you hear this a lot, that there are people who are strong advocates for what our members in the regions or in their own individual regional markets need from their union. Elizabeth, help us identify what are the things that you feel like are in fact things that members living outside of office cities or outside of New York generally do sort of broadly need? And where are there places perhaps that you think we need to be taking a more specific view of what members in, say, your liaison area need that might be different from others?
Ooh, all right. I have two categories of answer for you. And there's, like I said before, when I was talking about representing in the room, about, and again, totally made up number, 80% of the things that members in Boston need are also things that members in general need. Because my first answer is always better wages. And that's not specific to Boston, that's going to be everywhere. It is very, very felt in the regions when we have mostly smaller houses, SPTs, guest artists, that where the wages tend to be lower, especially when you have the big Lort houses, the big resident theaters, where when they have those jobs available, that's when they're hiring out of New York. And so the local actors only get the lower paying jobs. And that's super upsetting. But in general, I don't think there's a single community in equity where people don't want better wages. So that's not a region specific concern. That's an everywhere concern. The way that we feel it might be different, but what we need is a universal. We want more jobs. We want more security. We want our theaters to look more like us. We don't want to see, I'm sure there is a time and a place for a completely, all white Mamma Mia, but having every regional theater do that every summer is not exactly helpful to the extremely diverse population living in Boston. But those are things that are very universal. There are some things that I think affect the regions differently, or it's not that we don't want them, because I think the regions can be used as a way to defend producers and their concerns. I think there's a lot of very real fear that there are not enough jobs to go around out in the regions. And so we will do everything possible to make producers happy so that they will give us more jobs. There are times when those fears are real and we have to understand what we can ask for. It feels like the ability to make a full-time living wage in New York seems easier, even if it's not, even if people are struggling the same way out in the regions as they are in New York City, it sounds less likely. It feels less like a possibility to make your full-time, I make 100% of my money from theater if you are not living in New York. That doesn't mean that people don't still need stability, or that's not something that we should be able to achieve. But people will defend their ability to be a participant in theater out of the fear that they might lose the option altogether if we push too hard on something. But there are places, and here are the ones that I will say I think are times when I do this full time and I maybe need to split my time and have a part-time job, because unfortunately, not only is the pay too low, but there also aren't enough jobs to go around for everyone living there to actually do it full time. There are certain issues that come up where you need to be able to think of both. You need to be able to think of, I do this full time and I also need to keep a part-time job. One of them is the push for 5-day work weeks. I cherish the idea of actually getting a weekend, of not working in the theater 6 days a week and then trying to like get your groceries and do your laundry and also be a person in just a 24-hour span. But a lot of the theaters in town, and I'm just speaking for Boston at this point, that have said, oh, we can do a 5-day work week, have simply made those 5 days longer and not cut hours, which means that people who also need to work because they're only getting 2 or 3 shows a year, if they're lucky, suddenly can't participate because they don't have a job that gives them that much flexible time to start at 1 PM every day. And so a push that was trying to make things better for members can actually make things a little worse or just more difficult.
So, Elizabeth, we've had you here for quite a while now. You've been such a fantastic guest for us. For anybody out there who is watching this who is not from Boston, if there's one thing you want everyone to take away that they will now understand about living and working as a stage manager or actor in Boston that they might not know before watching this episode, what is it?
That our theater is really great. It's that listen, we get a lot of not just Boston, a lot of the different regional cities get a lot of flack of like, oh, you're not doing interesting work, you're not doing new work, you're doing, rehashes of stuff that was on Broadway a few years ago. But Boston's doing really interesting work. There's, new plays, there's new musicals, there's just really fascinating, totally worthwhile stuff. And anyone who discounts it for being regional theater is wrong and should know it.
So just because, we name checked ART and Huntington before, can you give me 2 Boston area theaters whose work you are super excited about and that you would be happy to see any day of the week?
Oh, I'm going to give you a weird one, which is Arlequin Players. Almost no one's going to know who they are, but they were doing really fascinating stuff. And I think, alas, they're not moved totally to New York, but they are currently going to do a thing off Broadway. So you can actually go see very, very cool Boston theater that was like inventing what virtual theater would look like during the pandemic. We also have Front Porch Arts Collective, which is the only Black owned and run theater in Boston. They do fantastic work and I love them so much. And now they are a resident company with the Huntingtons who are going to see really exciting things come out of Front Porch. But they're doing work that really centers on joy in a way that we don't have a lot of.
Elizabeth, we have kept you very, very long. I thought we were on our way out, but Sid asked another question. We are gonna let you go. But thank you for being on the show. This is awesome. And I learned some stuff today that I didn't know. And like Sid said earlier, the learning doesn't ever end. We like to keep learning everything and just keep going and going and going. You are welcome back anytime. Congratulations, and we will see you soon.
Yes, indeed. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Wonky Weekly. Of course, you can always find all of our episodes at wonkyweekly.com. Drop us a line anytime. If you have thoughts or questions for Elizabeth, you can put those in the contact form as well, and we will pass them on to her. We know her. We can get her. We can Slack her if we want to. Turn off your Slack. So that's all we've got for this week. Once again, I am Sid Solomon.
Rashaan James II.
And let's hope that there's no more construction in Rashaan's apartment next week. Drill.
It's the worst.